Hello, welcome everybody to this day where we're going to be discussing exploring the masculine. And one of the talks we have today is with Erik Roth. And I was so happy when you decided to be a part of this symposium. Erik, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Martha.
Yeah. So Erik is an astrologer, and his subject that he's going to be speaking to, his title is The Understory and Authenticity of the Masculine, an Astrological Perspective of Mars and the Masculine Principle. And I just want to say before we start that a huge part of my own reason for wanting to hold this symposium and explore all these ideas is because I've been, told by the spirit world to be channeling these books that are about the divine feminine, the divine masculine, and the healing of all these things. And the channeling of the book of around the divine feminine was really easy for me. And that draft is done. 2 years ago it was done, but I haven't started the channeling the book on the divine masculine because I personally have been sitting with a lot of questions around what is the divine masculine, what are those positive archetypes that could exist for us, what do we do with the whole struggle of toxic masculinity and that kind of a thing. So when Erik and I spoke a couple of weeks ago about his work and his interest in the masculine, it was like a dream come true, because I've been trying to find people to have these conversations with for literally years. And all of the people speaking about the masculine in the symposium are a dream come true for me. But yeah, so Erik, in particular, I'm really happy to welcome to this. And before we start, also, I just want to read your bio.
Okay.
So since 2010, Erik Roth has been providing astrological services as a shamanic astrologer, teacher, and writer, and served 9 years as the managing director of the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School. Erik is the author of Sacred Hearth Within, Vesta in Astrology. He comes from the lineage of Daniel Giamario's Shamanic Astrology Paradigm, a system of astrology that is holistic, archetypally driven, and founded upon the three worlds, one of the main principles of this system of astrology. One of the primary focuses of Erik's work has been the exploration of astrological Mars, the masculine, and its various archetypal expressions through the zodiacal signs and beyond. In this work, he has co-facilitated webinars with Daniel Giamario aimed on deepening the inquiry about the masculine and its relationship to the feminine through myth, psychology, and history. He has also co-facilitated webinars with Kaylin Castell, who's also a speaker in this symposium, and wonderful, about utilizing the stars, signs, and planets in ceremony and other magical purposes. Exploring the alchemy and archetypal magical ceremonial qualities of the stars, planets, and astrology has been a natural outgrowth of Erik's ongoing vision quest of understanding the nature of who and what we are as souls inhabiting Earth as a physical body.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Martha, that was good. Thank you. It's really just an honor to be here, to be part of this great symposium with over 30 speakers here, all diving into the subject matter of gender, sexuality, and our relationship to all of that in our lives and our interactions. I do feel that astrology is one of the better tools that we can utilize to help us understand our relationship in our lives and who we really are on the deepest possible level. And that includes the masculine, feminine, and all other gender expressions. There is a part of this presentation, if we have time, I can go through, and when it comes to transgender expressions, there is some of that I'm going to get into, and then a little bonus on Vesta as well. So I'm really excited to be sharing this, and I look forward to doing more in the future as well. I love doing presentations like this anyway, so this is just one that on a very personal level really strikes a huge chord in me.
Wonderful. So
So
take it away.
all
Ready?
right,
Yeah.
I if you're ready, I can share my screen
Yeah.
and give everyone some additional things to look at while we are talking out there here. Yes, the understory and authenticity of the masculine. Um, in this really points to the, the the wounds of our society, our culture, Western culture in particular, and the challenges that all genders have had to face, not just the masculine, but obviously the feminine and um, everything else that has not been able to fully express itself, especially in recent centuries until just in the last decade or so. So it's up to us to, as human beings on this planet, to help awaken our own authenticity, to help awaken who we really are. And some of what we can learn is from the ancient past and our relationship to the earth and sky to help bring that out in us. But there are things that I'm going to be bringing in, such as tools from a particular book that has been huge in my life with regards to my own development and who I am as a quote man in this world. There'll be a lot to reveal in that regard, including some personal sharing stories along that. So let's get into the understory, and I'm going to start with a quote here from James Hollis's book, which is something I'm going to refer to here and there during this presentation. Under Saturn's Shadow, The Wounding and Healing of Men. So this is, he gets it from C.G. Jung. Actually, I've got a correction. It's not C.J. Jung, it's C.G. Jung. But to live the journey of the soul is to serve nature, to serve others, and to serve that mystery of which we are the experiment. Then we will have incarnated the invisible, made luminous the short episode between two great mysteries, essentially the mystery of ourselves and the mystery of the universe. And that is what that's the walk that we're walking, the journey that we're taking. And the invisible is that which is unconscious, that all those archetypal energies, those complexes, those that soul itself. How can we have a relationship with that? Well, we've got to make that visible. We've got to make that conscious in our lives. So here's some of the main highlights of this webinar. It's of course Shamanic Astrology perspective of the masculine, and I got feminine here, and I'll briefly mention that as I talk about Mars too. Although you've got a lot presentations about the feminine in this, so I didn't really put much energy into that space. The 12 signs are archetypes and what are their natural expressions. The 8 secrets that men carry within. I'm also going to talk about toxic masculinity and the need for rebirthing the masculine. I also have some information about the synodic cycle of Mars and Mars returns, and then the transgender non-binary as it relates to the natal chart. So I've done some initial research in that for astrology, and there's still a lot to uncover with that, and it's kind of revealing some of it about the path and the evolution of who we are as humans, and asteroid Vesta's role. So we'll take a look at that at the end. And again, Martha, if any questions or thoughts come up, feel free to come in and share.
I will.
All right, so Mars and the masculine. So Mars in the natal chart represents the masculine principle. So this is the archetypal principle. It doesn't mean that represents the biological man. It's for men in general, it is the man, quote, man they are intended to be in this lifetime. So for women, it's the symbol of the longing of the other. as well as the larger part of their inner other. And for transgender people, this can be defined on a case-by-case basis to varying degrees. In my work, um, as an example, I have a friend who transitioned from a woman into a man, and he started identifying more and more with his Mars sign than with his Venus sign, but there was still a lot of overlap there, and it was fascinating to see that development over the years, and what he expressed in that space. So again, some may identify more with it more strongly than others. So this is again not to the one size fits all here. This is something that is fluid, and something that I think is also evolving, even that initial definition of what I just shared around Mars. So Mars is neither good nor bad. It is seen as a progressive part. Progressive meaning that it's something that is evolving with the person in their current life story in the natal chart. And then it's a personal planet, uh, and it has basic qualities as an active force in transit, including even just on a natal level, it can be an active force within our chart. And it's initiator of the masculine. It symbolizes the masculine principles I've shared. It's an action-oriented energy. It's yang. That represents the full spectrum of authentic roles. Authentic roles of the archetypal masculine. So again, it's the archetypal masculine, not necessarily the biological man, but it certainly affects that to a great extent. And along with the moon, it carries the traumas and violations and validations of the masculine. That's something I'm going to be sharing about. And then traditionally associated with Aries and Scorpio. Although with Scorpio, once Pluto was discovered and understood more by astrologers, that became the more resonant with the planet Pluto. And what's interesting about the planet Mars and the quote God of War, thousands of years, many thousands of years ago, Mars, or the archetypal imagery of Mars, had other names, other god names. And those god names were not just about war. They were, uh, there was a large part of that that had to do with the masculines of service to the earth through agriculture and as a defender of the feminine. And the defender of the feminine is mainly the defender of Earth itself, as the Earth Mother. So when we're talking about that, especially during the matriarchal times, over 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. So the warrior image, it's always kind of been there, but it took on an entirely new level 3,000 years ago when professional armies started to roll across the planet, and was made kind of at one of its peaks during the Roman Empire and Alexander the Great time. So, and then that model was captured. That model was spread throughout the planet as like, oh, this is the way to do it. So we need to have professional armies, and we need to have men and soldiers, and conquering and that such. It doesn't mean that war wasn't part of the earth prior to 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. It certainly was, but to the extent of making it part of what we call normal in this world. And that's shown as a book I recommended to you. It's The Terrible Love of War, by James Hillman, which he goes into the whole definition of what normal is and how humans have made war normal, in particular the patriarchal powers that be that are here on this planet. All right, so let's go in. Let's review a little bit. I'm not going to go over every single archetype one by one, but I've got it shared on the screen here, so we'll see a few of these. And with Mars, at this time of this recording, Mars is in the sign of Aries. Something I did a video of recently and did some work with a couple of years ago when it spent 6.5 months in that sign in 2020 and early 2021. So each Mars, so if you look at the masculine, it's not just this quote active force as far as the alpha male force as you know, is usually promoted, like, oh, you got to be tough, you got to be, you know, you got to not let them see you cry and all of that. That's a very limited role and part of the challenges that we have on this planet. I'll go more into that as we get in deeper into this presentation. But Aries usually falls into that category of that spirit, that alpha male spirit of that way, especially the fire energy. And a lot of the signs that are listed here are sort of co-opted into that space and invalidated in order to serve a larger patriarchal civilization, or redirected their energies to serve that. In the same way, you know, the feminine has been strongly violated and invalidated. Uh, those archetypes, which are, um, you know, profound and have had enormous impacts in human civilization. So these are all the authentic or the natural expressions of these archetypes, like Cancer, a nurturing, compassionate father and provider; Pisces, healer, empath, infinite dreamer, helper extraordinaire, and mystic. These are all authentic expressions of the masculine too. Um, and Sagittarius, the explorer, adventurer, philosopher; and the Gemini, for example, the eternal youth, the Peter Pan, the sacred clown, and contrarian. It's an androgynous type of archetypal energy, archetypal force. And every one of these has been on some level um, distorted or you know, pushed aside in order to serve a greater level. And obviously, in order for civilization to function, you know, people have to come together, cooperate, and be of service out there. But you know, what are the sacrifices that are being made in order to do that? So we're going to get into some of this here, but these are just the 12 main signs here, and um, you know, person is can pause it here and look at all of this if they choose, for sure. And I'm going to show the toxic or unhealthy expressions of these signs too. So there's another slide that goes into that. Now, the sun and the moon, again, I'm coming from a perspective of shamanic astrology. As you mentioned, I come from the shamanic astrology paradigm, that system. And so it's not traditional astrology, although there is some like connection to various other kinds of astrology that come into shamanic astrology, but they're not. It's its own thing. Again, this is the shamanic astrology paradigm is taught by Daniel Giamario. There are other astrologers that call themselves shamanic astrologers that may not have gone through this particular paradigm, so they might do a different version of shamanic astrology in that sense. So the sun represents the fuel that we burn, and the moon represents the archetype we mastered coming into this current life. And so the sun and the moon's archetype would change how a person's masculine expression is in their life. So it's not that, okay, the Mars sits in a compartment and it's totally, you know, disconnected from the sun and the moon and the Venus and Mercury. It's affected by all of that. And so that's part of what makes us unique, is when we have these profound, unique natal charts, which are reflections of our soul's direction here. For example, a man with a Mars in Aries and the sun in Pisces would be more inclined to be a protector, helpful, and sensitive to others than if he was born with both Sun and Mars in Aries. Another example, again, this is just a very general definition, especially the sensitivity part. That would be the difference there. Another example is the same man, if his moon was in the sign of Gemini, he would have a lighter, more imaginative, active way of being in the Mars expression. And if the moon was in the sign of Virgo, it'd be more serious and practical and analytical. So whatever Mars expression is, it's colored by that sun and moon to a large extent. Okay, so we're going to really get into this as a topic when it comes to genuine, authentic masculine. on a personal level, this is something that has affected me very, very deeply in my life growing up, and I see it everywhere. Uh, just walking around the neighborhood, um, you know, seeing stories online and so forth. Uh, I see it in various places, and these are qualities. This has certainly become very prominent in recent years here in the United States with the Donald Trump presidency, and you see it also in other countries, certain rises to power of strong patriarchal leaders that eschew any other way of being other than this romanticism with this, you know, kind of dictator image. Um, so here's some bullet points of how they come across. And there was uh, there's been some articles that have been opened up and helped me understand, and that there was one article about mask wearing and health and the masculine and men in particular, and actually kind of goes deeper into the whole saga of men not going to doctors to help themselves, not wanting to be vulnerable, not wanting to be quote looked at as soft. And this is a full like thread that goes into a really deep thing about shame and guilt, which is a slide that's coming up here regarding under Saturn's shadow book. But these ones here are really like symptoms of a much larger problem. So this is something that I saw. I mean, growing up, that first bullet point, and I would say the first two bullet points, really impacted me very, very powerfully. Not allowing emotions perceived as feminine to show. Crying, empathy, certain kinds of sensitivity, they looked at as weak or too feminine. Oh, don't cry like a girl kind of thing. Not appearing weak in front of others, which can include like revealing sharing the truth about your emotional state in a deep way. Then there's a certain judgment on the patriarchy that can come through, which can bring up shame and guilt. Because we as human beings, and men in particular, which includes trans men, which includes gay men, which includes any of those, can shows up, and even in other genders, there's a filament in there that we can experience, and I've seen others as well experience. All about winning and dominance over others, self-centered, egocentric, and reactive. Now, these are not just things that are just biological or met, but this covers the whole gamut. But I'm talking primarily about the masculinity part here. Never admitting defeat, leading to the denial of any loss, even if it means denying reality. And we saw a lot of that in the previous administration in the United States. And then being stronger is better. So we can also say being bigger is better too.
Bigger, that's what I was going to say, also bigger.
Bigger. And this is why I have a picture of this truck here.
Yeah.
There's an article on Bloomberg last year that caught my attention about the enormous size of pickups. Now, we can say on a practical level, sometimes people need large vehicles for their work and whatever they're doing. I get that. That's authentic use of a vehicle that size, but it's become a vehicle that people, especially certain people that use it to just haul groceries around or take a vacation or without, hooking up a trailer or anything, but they way more than they ever would ever need. Way more engine, way more lights that blare brightly and shine into your rearview mirror. And this is just an article that he was showing his son, the author of the article showing his son in front of this pickup they saw in a parking lot. And it just shows how big that these pickups have become, which is a reflection of the masculinity at this stage at this stage here in the world, and America in particular, which has a fascination with this bigness of all. They want to build big, and even China is kind of getting into that space as well. But yeah, that's a that's something that when we're looking around out there, this is this is not normal. This is toxic. And it the loud engines, the bright lights, just the blaring of everything, which creates more pollution and uh, hazards out there in the world for all of us, and be really dangerous. And he talks about the dangers of just even walking around, and because people have trouble seeing out those pickup trucks, that they can hit people really, really easily. Um,
Plus all the fuel they're using.
yeah, exactly. Although just recently, the first F-150 uh, fully electric vehicle was just uh, sent off. The order was fulfilled. A fully electric car, pickup truck. So that can be really helpful. But we'll see how all of that goes. That's a whole different subject, which uh, I sometimes another thing that's personally is environmentalism and
Right.
are that's actually a symptom of the patriarchy too, because the extreme masculinity and the pollution of the earth is a reflection of the hate and the rage of the masculine,
Right.
and
Exactly.
of the power and the greed. So they're stripping earth, and ultimately, though, just like within ourselves, we destroy the feminine within, we destroy ourselves. There's it's a no-win situation. And this goes back to the Inquisition. It goes back to the conquering of continents and peoples and cultures and eradications of languages. It Everything. It's all wrapped up into this toxicity.
Yeah. Well, and
Yeah, it's a big it's a
yeah,
big thing.
a couple of the talks on the seventh day of the symposium specifically draw that connection, the connection of the healing of our relationship to gender to the healing of our planet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Oh,
mean, so yes, it's direct correlation.
I
Yeah,
love it. I absolutely love it. I'm glad more and more are becoming rare. It's absolutely needed. You know, I drive a sedan, and I've driven one for decades, and I I just shake my head when I see what's around me, and just the complete lack of awareness and consciousness of what they're doing, and even of themselves and their own uh, journey of how they may not even want to be facing their own inner truths. Uh, yeah. Anyway, so I know that kind of gets into another different thread there, but it is powerful, and I really uh, I really hope to see a shift in consciousness around this in my lifetime. But we, astrologically speaking, and with the different ways of measuring this, we're at a turning of an age from one 26,000 year period to another, and this is the decay of the patriarchal force, and it's going to take some time for it to fully be let go of and transition to something else. And while that's happening, we live in a time of chaos, and chaos is necessary for things to be rebirthed, for us to seed something that is more in touch and harmony with our relationship, not only with our gender expressions and who we really are as our identity, but our relationship to the earth, which runs concurrently. Without you can't have one without the other. They are linked, uh, uh, a quantum.
yep.
So let's look at some unhealthy or toxic sides. As you can see with Aries, something I talked about, that's the extreme masculinity. Really, although it kind of filters down into many of the other ones, just simply because it's culturally like present. We live in that field. Um, One of the other signs like Taurus, the saturation of feeling good, vanity, narcissism, superficial. Gemini, you see this a lot. A toxic Gemini would be never serious, never committed, and cannot tell the truth. Can be pathological in that way. Cancer, overbearing and controlling of family, becoming a person where others are solely dependent upon, and they're feeding some hole that they can't fully nourish, and so they want more and more others to depend on, and then eventually that leads to probably illnesses and uh, a collapse of their being. Um, and then Leo, we certainly see this in the world. God Emperor complex, narcissism, megalomaniacs. Oh, Vladimir Putin, for example. Now, I'm trying to remember what his chart was, but he has uh, semblances of that in his life. Um, uh, Virgo, and this is mainly related to Saturn with perfectionism and expectations of that in others, and unable to relate. It becomes like they can become so impersonal and detached that they have a disconnect with other human beings on a on a toxic level. Now there's other areas of like I'm not listing all the toxic things on these signs. This is just a sort of a basic level look at. And like Pisces, hey, I have Mars in Pisces, Moon in Pisces. So, and uh, I've certainly been, I've seen this in myself uh, in the past, in illusions, inability to handle reality, addiction to sacrifice himself. And we can also include, I've seen this in other people that have strong Pisces out there in the world, drugs, addictions to drugs, the whole can't handle reality thing, to escape that reality, to numb the sensitivities, and to just through alcohol or other plant medicine or uh, other pharmaceuticals, that kind of thing. It can show very strongly in that. And it took me a while once I started discovering that I really wanted to know more about who I was, who I really, really was, because of a powerful spiritual awakening that I had. It got me onto that road, and I haven't really looked back since then. I've had some bumps along the way for sure, but it's really helped me come to peace with the Pisces, and be able to understand its authentic expression in this world. So we trace back a little bit, because I was a sensitive kid and I cried a lot, and it wasn't really supportive. My dad didn't really understand. And I got to see some experiences. I experienced, um, there are many in our generation that have, had the belt applied. I've certainly experienced that with my dad. But one time, my I had my family had friends in the LA area. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, and we went out to see them. We'd go there every month or something. We go into the San Fernando Valley where they live. I think they lived kind of out on the outskirts of it at the time, but uh, there were two adult husband and wife friends, and then their two sons. And the older son, which was a few years older than me at the time, I remember a scene, and I was remembering this recently, of being in a hallway that was not lit very well, and seeing the father shove the son up against the wall. And I remember some physical abuse briefly. And I don't remember what triggered that, what catalyzed that, but I knew it was a very scary thing, and I knew that it was not right. But I had no power. I didn't feel any power that I could to change the circumstances at all. And I hadn't thought about that for a long time until I reread this book again about the wounding and healing of men, on this journey of creating this presentation for your symposium that helped open up some of this for me, and rediscover some power within myself, personal power of my own journey, and what healthy masculinity is. Uh, it's just profound of some of the memories I've had, because I've had in high school, my junior high school, I've had my lunch money stolen. I've been, bullied, and I've had grade school. I had a situation where someone pinned me against a fence with a pocket knife
Mm.
by another kid, and this is where grace steps in. This is where trust and faith steps in sometimes, because I didn't know what was going to happen next, and a teacher showed up that moment. I didn't never saw where they were. They just showed up, and it got the kid to back off, obviously, and kid lied about what he had in his hand, and they walked off. So he took him somewhere else. And this is, of course, growing up in LA, and certain things happened there. This is so for me. This brings me into this information about this particular book, which is, I consider it a book that I would refer to for all people to read, both men, women, and any gender, doesn't matter. This applies to us all, and we're all part of this civilization, and we have these, what he calls secrets, affect us all. And when I read this, it was some of these. I mean, I can feel all of this in my bones here, and I'll highlight some. So let me read this off. So men's lives, number one, men's lives are as much governed by restrictive role expectations as the lives of women. Absolutely true. The lives of men, it's been limited. Although it's come out in last couple of decades, it's been more broader for all genders, but there's still a cultural perception that is very strong in our world. Men's lives are essentially governed by fear. Absolutely. Power of the feminine is immense in the psychic economy of men. Yes, in fact, he talks about in the fifth one about the mother complex, and he talks about how societies and tribes thousands of years ago, long before, they would find ways to, and in some cases hundreds of years ago, find ways for the quote boy to leave the mother, meaning to find its own identity. What would be that person without the mother around? Not in a way that was to traumatize it, but to shake up the person, to show it itself, to show us ourselves. And there's a lot of people that have that complex, or where the mother involves themselves in the lives of both men and women throughout their lives, where there's no separation, and the person doesn't know themselves. They lose track of themselves. This can be prone, more people can be prone to that than others, but it happens with the feminine there. And this is why, and part of why, and we just touched upon it with the Mother Earth too, of why if there's a complex and a trauma, or a distortion, or some powerful issue early in life, it can show up where the person ends up unconsciously projecting that out onto women, and creating a space for more violence to be perpetrated, because of the lack of guidance, of the lack of healthy modeling out there. Men's lives are violent. I just talked about that, violent because their souls have been violent and this has to do with not just the parental influence, but civilization over the last 2,000 years. This is and the improper modeling that has gone on with men, and the man collude in the conspiracy of silence whose aim is to suppress the emotional truth. This is something you may notice with a lot of guys out there in the world, just regular Joes. They have trouble admitting their emotional truth. Now, this book was written in 1994, so a lot has changed since then, but some not so much. There's still a lot of that sort of that masculine, that toxic masculinity coming forth there. Again, it doesn't matter the sexual orientation here either. This encompasses the wide breadth of it all. And
something.
sure.
Yeah. So my 15-year-old identifies as gender fluid, right? But goes by any pronouns, born identified as a boy. So one thing he has shared with me, they've shared with me is maybe 2, 3, 4 months ago, we were talking about their gender experience and their sense of conditioning around being a boy.
Yeah.
And they said to me that even for them, so he's 15 years old in 2022, right? Born in 2007. And he grew up with me being a child therapist, right? So what did I do? His whole childhood was help other families, other parents, and other children identify and express and articulate their feelings and get their feelings met. Okay. I mean, their emotional needs met. That was my whole job. That was what I did. I was like an expert at it, right? And I raised him in that environment. But even for him, he said, yeah, it's taken me until now, age 15. I mean, it's like kind of amazing that a 15-year-old will even be saying this, but
it is amazing. I'm blown away by this.
Yeah, I was too. But still, whatever. He said, I realized I have felt my whole life like it's not okay for me to be sensitive. It's not okay for me to have feelings, to express my feelings. And I said, wait, what? Your mother, meaning me, was a child therapist your whole life, and you felt that way? And he said, yeah. And the preschool he went to and the elementary school he went to, both, we chose them because their focus, like their main power, like their main strength is in social emotional development. So and he lives in California, USA, so
yeah.
It's like, I don't know where you could get a more emotionally supportive environment than this here, right? At least as of 2022, I don't know how somebody could get a more supportive environment. So even for them, this is true. And it's just this year, he's in 9th grade. He taught himself to be okay hugging his friends. and he had an experience last couple of weeks ago of crying in public for the first time, and he was so excited.
Wow.
he was so happy that he like succeeded at crying in public. Yeah. So
beautiful. I love it.
Yeah.
That's more men. He could become a model,
right,
for not just gender fluidity, but others as well. I mean, just be able to be vulnerable
right,
as a human being.
right.
And I absolutely, I love that. And because the thing is, there's the perception that men are not, when they cry or when they are vulnerable like that, it's like there's a shame and a guilt that we feel internally. I feel it, and I certainly feel it, especially when other men are around. I feel it as if I did something wrong, like I'm broken as a
Wow.
human being. And I certainly felt that growing up, like something was wrong with me because my friends didn't feel the same way in that sense. They were, not all of them, but they were, I perceived them as stronger than me in that sense. But I was just simply different, not that I was bad. I was just different than they were. Um, and so I'm so glad that he gets to experience this with you, Martha, who has the experience, who has the knowledge, who has the skill set and the love to nourish this in him.
Well, and I think it's not just him. I mean, it's obviously, it's like this generation is, and I don't want to sound, I don't want it to sound like he's amazing and special. I mean, he is, but it's really, he's not the only one. All his friends are like this generation there's something seriously amazing going on. Yeah.
There is. And we'll get into the transgender thing. I've got some slides for this, but I find it just when I see like my friends up in Beaverton, Oregon, who are one's transgender, the other one is gender fluid, and their partners, they actually are married together, and I have a few others who are transgender as well. To see and then read stories about it, to see them become and to not be afraid, to see them to be able to experience and express themselves fully for who they are. It's, to me, it's part of our evolution as human consciousness becoming more authentic, that they're discovering themselves. I just think it's so beautiful to see this. So yeah, I love it. And to me, it adds elements. In fact, there's a book that I'm going to also mention later that talks about how Native Americans looked at that as certain tribes, not all of them, looked at that as they were closer to divine energy, like they were closer to a certain magic that the regular quote male female polarity wasn't. That there was a certain something that they captured in some kind of alchemy that they were bringing into themselves. And the awareness, the awakening that's happening now, especially the generation you mentioned, I'm looking forward to seeing this evolve, seeing them mature and become more, and to show up and to help guide the civilization.
Yeah, absolutely.
We absolutely need them in this world. Oh my gosh. Oh, okay. There's something here in the seventh one here. Every man carries a deep longing for his father and for his tribal fathers. This is something that James Hollis, talks at great length about, and how not just about absent fathers, the biological fathers or guardians, or you know a healthy male figure, but just a sense of someone to show, quote, the man or the boy the world, someone to show what does it mean to be a man, that it's not, no one, I mean, there's not really any single definition that you could go to and go, oh, that's what it is. No, it doesn't really exist, not in its truest soulful sense. And the ones that are out there, I think, to a large degree, are pretty limited, the definition. And so it's that yearning, that desire, going, I think of, again, this is not a perfect situation, but there's sometimes you see them in movies, like in the movie Braveheart. There was when William Wallace's character, played by Mel Gibson, was a boy, and his parents had died. His uncle showed up, quote uncle. I don't know if it was his real uncle, but he basically took him on his journey, his vision quest journey, for many years. They traveled lands, and he taught him language and culture, and even helping defend himself. There's a role there, not just men that can play that role, can be any gender, but it's that longing for that outer vision, to go outside the cradle, to go outside the nest, and to go, what is this? How can we? And this is something I longed for, and I didn't realize I was longing for. Is like, we must take those steps into the wilderness to go into the darkness, to see ourselves, to know ourselves. And the longing for a healthy mentor, father, tribal fathers, that when the world became industrialized, a lot of that was lost centuries ago. And so this is a chance. Now, I know that there's a lot of men groups out there, but they're not, from what I've experienced, and this is not all of them, but from what I've experienced, they only touch upon the real issues. Like they're not, I think some of them are not fully getting what needs to take place. They can be helpful. They're a step in the right direction, but they're not certainly fully fulfilling. And then there's some that might be more, quote, toxic out there in the world too. I'm not going to name any particular organizations in this video, but I have seen some myself, and I was even part of a small men's group for a couple of years in Portland that, which I mentioned to you in a conversation before, a book. It was centered around the book. If you can get this, everyone that is watching this, The Way of the Superior Man. And just the title right there was a huge turnoff for me. I mean, it was just not, I rebelled hardcore against that. And I did read parts of the book because I was curious about it, but it didn't, I left the group. It didn't speak to me. It wasn't resonant with me. And I learned some interesting things so there's some things in there were helpful, but it really did not speak to my truth or my soul. And so for those men out there, you really, if you're in a part of a men's group out there, I would encourage you to really look to see and feel if that's really something that speaks to your soul. I feel that there needs to be, and this is where it gets into this, my 11th slide here, how can we rebirth the masculine? Rites of passage.
Before we go there, can
Yeah.
I want to, can we go back to the other one real quick?
Yes.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
I wanted to say two things. I want to ask you a question. I want to say something in terms of that book that you're mentioning, The Way of the Superior Man. Yes, like I told you when we talked before, it was one of the most disgusting books I've ever read in my entire life. But it did catalyze something really cool related to my 15-year-old. It was actually a year ago when I read that book. And when I finished reading it, I said to my 15-year-old, oh my God, I just read the most disgusting book. and they said, oh, tell me about it. Like what, why? And I said, okay, well, here's its message, and I'll just sum up the message, which is, if you're a man, the only way to be a man, for a real man, is to not be a woman. Don't do anything that is associated with being female. I mean, that's like super simplified, but that was my takeaway. It's everything that's wrong with this planet, right, was summed up in that book. I mean, it's terrible.
It was like the cultural projection of going, this is what you're supposed to be as a man. It's a patriarchal. And it's just like, I was looking and going, oh my God. And this is how you're supposed to treat a woman,
Oh my God.
And I just like, oh, it was so against the deepest parts of myself. I won't share what I did at the end after it was over, but let's just say I no longer have that book, and it ended pretty quickly once I was able to detach from that. But again, with my Pisces nature, there's a part of myself I don't want people to feel bad. I want the best for people. I have empathy, and so it can sometimes take me a bit to come into a space where I realize something needs to shift here.
Yeah.
So in that particular men's group, that's kind of what happened there. But but no, thank you for sharing that, Martha. That was.
Wait, I just want to finish that really quick. So then what that catalyzed when I said that to my 15-year-old was about, I don't know, an hour later or something, he came back to me and he said, yeah, so, our conversation about that book made me realize I need to tell you something. And then that's when he came out to me as being gender fluid and pansexual and all these things, right? So it served a purpose. And the other
It
purpose
did.
it served also was to spark to deepen my curiosity around all of this stuff around the masculine. So it's done its job, and I no longer have that book also. Oh my goodness. But can I also go to one of the points on here that I have a lot of questions about? Can I ask you a question about one of these?
Yes. Yes.
So, because I'm just very curious, and you can give me a simple answer. This is, probably a 3-day conversation, but the one that I struggle with is the whole men must leave their mother thing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it's encapsulated here, but go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously I am the mother of someone born identified as a boy who is now 15. So I have lots of feelings around that. And certainly I would not want him to be enmeshed with me or never separate from me emotionally, obviously, right? But
Right.
I really struggled with this idea that, quote unquote, boys must be wounded in order to leave their mother. I don't want my child to be wounded,
Right. He addresses that point in there in that
Okay.
book, really. And I look at that and I was like, what do you mean by wounded? I had the same question.
Mhm.
And it's hard to encapsulate in this particular thing. What he's talking about here is the wounding of the separation, not the separation to abandon the mother. This is not about abandonment or never see the mother again. It's more like a way to find oneself through finding what is it like life beyond the mother. And it
Mhm.
doesn't mean you got to do it at 8 years old or 12 years old, but there's a wounding can happen if it's done in a way that is supportive, not where you kidnap them and then you never see them again. Like someone kidnaps them and never see. That's not the kind of wounding I'm talking about here. Although that obviously can happen in the real world. It's just this. It's more about the helping the quote masculine energy, whatever that's there, to be seen by the person within themselves outside the mother. And not to say again, it doesn't mean that they can't return, because in tribal culture, sometimes they did take extreme levels in some of the stories that he relates in here. So I appreciate that question in there. It's a longer conversation,
Mhm.
and I just an example in the real world, in my own life, uh, just basically going out on my own as an adult, just going out and living on my own. That's a separation. That's like, okay, I'm 20 something years old. I'm going out. Um, I did find my way out there for one time for just a short time in a year, and then ended up having to move back because I didn't have enough money to rent an apartment because my roommate moved out and he moved back with his father, and so I didn't have anybody to help pay the rent, and so I had to move back to my parents. Um, and then later, I met my ex-wife. This is all in my 20s, and then that was the second time I moved out, and that got me out. And then, where I was really finding my true course outside that was when I got divorced at 27, and found myself with myself in a way that I had never truly experienced before. And it was a shock and somewhat traumatizing. I talked to my mom. It wasn't like I abandoned her, but and she was very supportive of that. We had many conversations, but I spent a lot of time alone, and there was a wounding that took place. But it was medicine that I was getting. It had a purpose. It wasn't without purpose. Like today, the wounding that's happening out there, it it's without a true cultural strong purpose. Like it doesn't have something to help them to put them on a place where a solid footing. There's a lot of wounding that happens where it just, they carry the wound and it becomes they just be the victim the rest of their lives. So this is a different kind of wounding that he's talking about here. And yeah, a longer conversation. And thank you again for asking that. So again, this isn't the way that I would, this is the way he writes these secrets. This is not the way that I would write them, just to clarify. Yeah.
Well, and bookmarks for future conversations are
Yes.
two things. Number one, of course, I would then ask the question, which we don't need to get into right now because it would take a really long time, but sure, and is that different for girls or people of other genders? Because I could relate to that myself in a certain way, right? As a girl,
Yeah.
even. Yeah.
Yes. Oh
Yeah.
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 I other sexual orientations, pansexual, cisgender, heterosexual, well, cisgender is heterosexual thing, but gay, other kinds out there, other varying expressions out there. This encompasses them all. Transgender people, whatever their soul might be identifying as. So a person's got to, understand who they really are, and they develop that. Like, for example, your son, who's a gender fluid, has brought and discovered parts of himself, and this is ever evolving as he's as they are coming into themselves. So this is written in '94. I think that if he would write this today, it would be written a bit differently, and I certainly would write it very differently. But yeah,
Well,
I know it's a longer conversation.
yeah. Well, and another bookmark for another conversation would also be something I'm sort of sitting with as you're talking is similarly with the the dark feminine archetypes. The idea that there is this destructive force in existence that can be toxic and that can get out of control, but also is necessary and needed, like
Yes.
a tree decaying in the forest needs to turn into compost so that life can emerge, right? So it's like a
absolutely.
simpler, yeah.
Oh my God, without the dark feminine, this earth would not have humanity on it. We'd be long gone.
Yeah.
The primal mother, we can call it, or the whatever words we want to use for it. It's a force, a powerfully primal creative force that I've certainly have met on many occasions, and I'm grateful for the guidance and the teachings and the sometimes strong hand that has helped me along on my journey. Uh, I'm in awe over it. When I had a series of Pluto cycles, for example, um, it, yeah, longer conversation, but I'll just say that I wouldn't be here talking with you without Pluto's help. And I look at Pluto as more of a strong primal feminine energy, like Kali or Pele or Ereshkigal, rather than the masculine Pluto. So that is really what the essence of Pluto in the modern sense, astrologically, goes into this wellspring of the dark feminine.
Yes,
And
I feel that so strongly too. Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
yeah,
Specifically.
thank you.
Yeah. And again, yet another conversation for the future is something I've been sitting with and I would love to explore more is what are the different shades of power and anger and wrath or whatever, of these various masculine archetypes and feminine archetypes, and
are
they different, are they the same, are they, anyway.
There's yeah, I mean, for the masculine, I mean, it can show up in the feminine too, but we talked about one of the big ones, which encompasses a lot of the variants, is the wrath against the feminine itself, because of a lack of guidance and education and proper healthy modeling by parents, by society, by teachers, by mentors of what the feminine really is, and the Earth Mother in particular. And then so they take it out, like when we see results in history, powerful results like the Spanish Inquisition, the Salem witch trials. We see it spreading across continents. Just absolutely horrible atrocities, holocausts take place because of this force. And it's completely distorted and corrupted and violated. And you're seeing, though, in our current society and civilization, that force trying to rise again. It's trying to make itself known again, like the corrupted, the violated one. But fortunately, I feel like it's not going to rise to that level like it did, say, during the Nazi regime, as an example. And other examples throughout history. This is what we certainly have to be very careful of as a civilization. Mother Earth, this is our sacred space. We are living in concert with her, and if we are not stewards, proper, healthy stewards of this land, we may not live this long on this planet. But if we can show up and help her, we can, we can thrive with her. And I feel, I'm very emotional here, but I feel very strongly around this. So
Now you can move on. Okay.
yeah, so thank you. But yeah, I love this dialogue here. So oops, I missed this slide. Okay. So these are just suggestions, and they're not like, and some of them I'm like, some of them are feelings too here. Like, for example, the fear and violence and propagation of it for thousands of years needs to be faced as the elephant in the room. Like, we need to fully dive into the deepest level of that, and that involves acknowledging our wounds and facing our emotional soul truth. This really encompasses not just the masculine, but everybody. I raised the masculine here because that's the topic of our presentation here. But it's to know that accountability and vulnerability is a spiritual strength, that it's not a weakness, that to cry, that to feel, it's a strength. And there's a power in that, and a cleansing that can happen. And men definitely need, especially those that overcompensate, like the example of that pickup truck, and a former president of ours overcompensating to such a degree that they lose, that they try to destroy the feminine within them. And the more that they do, they destroy themselves.
Sorry, can I
So
say one
please.
thing? So Matthew Engel, who is also a speaker on this day of exploring the masculine, his talk is about essentially the sacred masculine with regard to queer men. And at one point in my talk with him, I asked him what his sense of the divine masculine is, and he said pretty much exactly what you're just saying, which is love. His answer was something along the lines of love, and
for sure,
yeah, and knowing the power of vulnerability, the power.
That's it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And
I mean,
sorry,
go ahead.
Sorry.
It's
So
part of our discussion.
Yeah, I think you are both going to be on the panel discussion regarding the divine masculine, and so maybe on that panel discussion, we can kind of expand on this together. But
I'd love that.
Yeah. Sorry, keep going now.
I think that's beautiful. One of the things that Carl Jung writes about is living a symbolic life, and it's about having meaning, finding meaning And when these rites of passage, which we only have various like faint echoes of today, are really need to we in this case, I think we need to invent new rites of passage for our society, for all peoples, and what we identify with, and what, maybe even customizing those rites of passage. Like when we're educated, we go to grade school, we go to high school, at least in our generation, I think, yeah, you're not far off from this age in mine. We're not really taught how to really be in the world. We just we go through, we get our studies, and then we go off into the world, right? But what is that? And that's something that I look at as something very, at least in my generation, our generation, that's missing. I don't know what it is like today's schools. I don't know what they are doing necessarily, or what options are available out there. So I'm hoping that more and more of that becomes available in the future, and consciousness becomes more aware of that. And maybe that could be something that future conversation. But that's living a symbolic life, meaning around us. This is why spirit guides. This is why shamanism is become so popular today, is because we find meaning there. We find something that we didn't have prior, and then there's something to it that affects us deeply, that is not about the intellect or the mind, but something even more deeply human that comes through. And so the stars and the planets, the signs, these help us understand the symbolic life. They help us understand ourselves, and they cultivate that which is within us. And we need to bring that which is within us to consciousness in order to face that truth in ourselves. Yeah, yeah. Masculine, as it is taught, doesn't truly inform us who we are as men, women, and other gender expressions. I didn't learn that. My dad didn't teach me that. My mom didn't really teach me that. My friends didn't teach me that. I learned it through my own exploration, and still today, it's a open question. And as I have a lot of Sagittarius on my chart, as you're aware, so that curiosity beckons me forward. That search beckons me, and it's exciting to learn, to grasp the complexity of what it means to be human, what it means to have a soul. It's just, I'm in awe. I'm in awe over it all. So there's some things about Mars and the synodic journey. Um, and shamanic astrology, Mars is a powerful 26-month cycle, and uh, it starts and ends with a Mars-Sun opposition. And whatever sign it's in during that Mars-Sun opposition, or whatever sign Mars is in, that's the sign of what we call the overtone, or the overstory, or something that like ripples in a pond, spreads through the 26-month period. And the last time it was in the sign of Aries in October of 2020. And the next one is coming up is Gemini in December of this 2022. And this 26-month cycle for all genders, all peoples, not just the male. But it has to do with the maturation of the masculine archetypes from incubation, birth, to the elder, transition, and metamorphic stages. It also relates to some degree loosely to the hero's journey in Joseph Campbell's work as well. So there's a connection there. That's a larger topic, but I want to touch upon it as part of this presentation so that people are aware there's another layer to this around Mars that is so vast, just like with Venus. And in fact, the presentation you did with Shu is another piece of that. And it's so vast and powerful. We could do hundreds of webinars on all of this. I mean, seriously, we could.
Yeah.
So I've done many, many webinars with Daniel Giamario and Caitlin Castell, and some with Tammy Brunk. Sheridan is now involved in the Venus Alchemy series, Sheridan Semple. And there are others out there that are working on this. And the more, the merrier. if we can keep cultivating understanding how as above, so below connects us, as within, so without connects us to the sky and the earth, this is going to help us understand the masculine and feminine and everything in between that and outside of that. Beyond duality, beyond duality. There's certain things called Mars returns, and they happen. In fact, your 15-year-old is in the middle of their Mars return, their second one. We all get them at 2, but it's the 15 to 17 one is the one that really shows up when we have a certain level of consciousness and awareness of our sexuality and our way of being and our puberty and all of that. And so it comes through. And then we get it again at 32, 47, 62, 64, and 79. And there's another one in the 90s, 94, I believe it is. But these returns, Mars can come back every 2 years to the same sign as our natal Mars sign. But it only happens in and around our solar return every 15 to 17 years. So it means it's like really coming back into ourselves, like a deeper incarnation of that archetype. Whatever Mars archetype, say your 15-year-old has, that's something that you can look at with them, to share what that maybe his relationship with the masculine is in this lifetime, to help them understand how it could evolve over time, as an example. In a Mars return, it's the deeper incarnation of the Mars sign and our relationship to the masculine. Along with Saturn, Mars does have a relationship with the father and loosely authority, primarily the patriarchy. So there is some loose connections between Mars and sort of the overarching patriarchal authority, as well as to the father, although Saturn, again, plays a really powerful role in that. So I want to, Saturn, I've had a topic for another day, but I've had a really profound, just like with Pluto, really profound relationship with Saturn. And I work it into my own, I would say, spiritual practice. We'll call it that. That's a topic I want to write a book about, just like with Mars. I want to write a whole book about that.
I want to hear about that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe we could do a webinar on that too down the road.
Many future conversations.
Yes, for sure. So each Mars cycle, return cycle, provides initiations for people to develop a healthier relationship with the masculine. This includes periods of surrender, transformation, tasks, and our polarity with the feminine, and ultimately becoming whole. I mean, this is what we're dancing around here, is a quest for wholeness. There's a whole webinar series that in the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School that is called the Inner Sacred Marriage Process, and deals with Mars and Venus and everything in between that helps us bring those two together and makes us whole, which includes the sun and the moon and the ascendant, and brings them into a space where we can fully become who we really want to become, and that where our soul is desiring. And Mars plays a role in this. And they have a dance together. In fact, Shu's presentation that I watched, it brings me back to my previous conversations with Daniel Giamario and Fiona Castell and doing work at the school. The pattern that Mars and Venus have in the sky and how it's imprinted into our civilization over time, over long periods of time, centuries and millennia. So this is, maybe someday I'll have a conversation with Shu and find out more about what her knowledge is and her insights there, because I find it really fascinating. So just a little bit on transgender. I know we're kind of coming up on some, towards the end of this webinar. I don't want to go too far here, but I will just say that you can really, not like here, I guess I'll get to really the research I've had on this, trans men, trans women. This is just a sampling. Again, and I've had one non-binary chart that I've looked at. But I've just again, a handful of charts here, no, roughly around roughly 20 or so. Some of the qualities I found: heavy planetary complexes. So what I mean by that is very strong hard aspects of like Pluto and Saturn, um, Uranus and Chiron, um, these things on their personal planets. Um, Again, I have a small data set, so at this point, I can't really draw too many conclusions around this. But another observation is, especially in transman, is the natal Venus, the elongation of Venus away from the sun, is anywhere between 29 and 47 degrees. That means I don't find it where it gets too close to the sun. Like there's something there. I don't know what that fully means. I just know that there's something to that, and it may have to do with the feminine, and maybe even the sun sometimes portraying as a solar masculine energy. But there are a lot of cultures where the sun is a feminine energy too. So it's not to just define the sun as masculine this way, but anyway, there's something to that. It doesn't show as strongly with trans women. It's between 19 and 46 degrees, so there's some that are a little bit closer. But I found, again, this is again a small sampling, and I know Kaylin has done some work in this area too, Kaylin Castell, and so this bears more, I would say, astrologers and other participants to look at this. I would invite those out there to kind of gaze into this, because it helps us understand ourselves, and there's something really powerful here, and that each one has a unique expression, and it I would say it guides them. And having heavy planetary cycles or complexes, I'll just comment on this. Yeah, it can be really, really challenging, but it really strongly motivates a person to discover themselves, the truth of themselves. And I really applaud the people that discover that, the transgender community, those that discover themselves in various sexual orientations and other expressions of gender. I applaud them for coming into their space and realizing their being and evolving that over time. And so again, this is just the astrology here that again, early research, that if you're curious about, feel free to jump into that space. But there's really profound information to be had there.
One thing, again, I only have a tiny sample size too, but I've been noticing Venus on the North Node with transgender woman, and then my 15-year-old has this humongous stellium on his Pisces North Node, with Venus as part of that. Anyway, so that's something I'm just sort of curious about and watching, and yeah, I'd be curious.
Yeah, no, that's great. No, that's any contribution is helpful. So, and Pisces, I will just share, Pisces is a archetype that can merge and morph beyond a particular gender, just like Gemini can. But it's done. Gemini does it through more of like a youthful imagination. Pisces does it through a certain sense of the oneness of the whole, and it kind of connects and brings that together through heart and soul.
Yeah.
So there's differing ways they can do it, but I found, like, I've been like, for example, I've had both women and men sometimes see, oh, are you gay? I'm like, no, I might be at times effeminate. I might show my emotions, but they look at that. There's a projection, a perception. Oh, that person must be gay, or they must have a different orientation. And, not necessarily, but that's just me being in touch with the deeper parts of myself and acknowledging that.
Right.
Yeah, I've had experiences in that being say gay men who have thought I was gay and tried to date me. I'll just say that, okay? And I was flattered by it, but I wasn't attracted to it. So it's just fascinating, but I'm not, it doesn't frighten me. It doesn't like, I need to like run away or anything like that, but it's like, wow, this is incredible. This is an incredible experience. There's something happening here with people and our perceptions of our views around the world. So I, anyway, uh, that's just some other experiences that I certainly have had in my life that have helped me understand more of what makes us human in our perception. Now, Native American and certain Native American tribes, in this book called "The Spirit and the Flesh," I think, Martha, this book was written in the late '80s, so there's some context there that is like uh, dated a bit, but it's still great. It was still powerfully groundbreaking at the time that it was written. Walter Williams, who's gay, but he went into and did many interviews and traveled all around North America, and I think he did some in South America too. But there are many tribal cultures in North America that treated uh, the transgender and gay lesbian orientation as something to be revered and honored in the community. This is not all tribes that thought this way, but they held it in a way where these expressions possessed a greater magic and closeness to spirit. An example was this term, which is a little controversial, called Berdacci, um, is quote, a man who does not fit in a traditional role of men. They could have various gender expressions, including asexual, gay, and otherwise nonconformist. Some of these tribes went well beyond duality, playing highly important roles, and they would have more than two genders, essentially. Sometimes three, four, or five genders. Um, and when the Europeans came over and they saw this, not only were they confused, but they feared those gender expressions and tried to eradicate that, as you can imagine. Um, and so this is something that still exists on some level in certain Native American communities. And for those that want a kind of a different perspective of that, that are watching this, dive into this book. It was recommended to me by a trans man, as a friend. Um, and I was like, wow, I never knew about this book. This is really interesting. So it helped me understand a little bit more about this. And then there's another one. There's a book series by Storm Constantine, who writes a series of fiction books based on the spiritual and physical embodiment of the masculine and feminine together. It's a fictional series called The Wraithu. And that was really illuminating. The first book isn't all that well written, but the concept comes across, and the rest of the books are really well done. And it's really powerful in the uniqueness. It's like a new species, quote unquote, that comes online in a future vision of the world, of the planet, which connects us to the concept of the three worlds of shamanic astrology and really spirituality, upper, lower, and middle world. These are all we can say that those who are true spirit, or perhaps who are biologically, physically one way, and yet their soul is another authentic expression, with many in between, I've found that we have a remarkable, unique connection beyond the middle world. That they have a perspective that I'm not saying that the others don't have, but they can certainly perceive something in a way that is relatively unique, and certainly they can nurture in themselves. Again, this is, I think, ultimately that we're going to evolve beyond duality here as a human species. And then I've got a little bit on Vesta here. I know we've probably gone an hour and a half, so um, uh, I don't know if you want to close up or what you want to do here.
I'd love for you to just touch on Vesta a little bit, because you have written this book on Vesta, and it's like yet another gigantic bookmark for exploring other things in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Vesta is initiator of the sacred. It creates opportunities to connect the middle world and terrestrial initiators of Saturn and Jupiter. It's a sacred devotion to a specific archetypal energy. So whatever sign Vesta is in that you find on your natal chart, it's that archetype that is intended to become a sacred devotion for ourselves. It awakens the natural vibration or heartbeat of the sacred qualities of that emerging Vesta archetype. And again, it has some really powerful connections to Saturn, and Vesta being the daughter of Saturn in mythology, but it's beyond that. Vesta as a goddess, or Hestia, she was the one that was first honored and last honored. She was the one that did not take part in any of the wars of the gods. The hearth was sacred, regardless of what was going on at that time. And thousands of years ago, even the Romans knew. And the only temples that were circular in that during those ancient Greek and Roman times were Vesta and Hestia, because they connected into the earth. Everything else was rectangular or square or whatever other shape. So she was really had a profound impact on civilizations during that time. And Vesta in our chart shows through in that way. And we have Vesta return cycles. And you can read more about this in my book, the Sacred Hearth Within, and Vesta in astrology. Vesta returns are times when we get more familiar with those Vesta qualities, the archetype that's showing up there. And especially the primary returns at 29, 58, and 87. And these cycles, these returns can last anywhere from around 16 months to 17 and a half months. And I measure the cycle based on the Sun Vesta opposition as the beginning and the end. Because Vesta is the only asteroid, the only one that we can see with the naked eye for a few weeks at a time during certain times of its orbit, especially during a Vesta Sun opposition. So we have to be under perfectly dark skies to do it, but you can visibly see that. And I wonder sometimes if the ancients at times saw Vesta. There's nothing written about it, but I just wonder about that. So during a Vesta return, allows that archetype to drop in at a deeper level, just like a Mars return. It's allowing that archetype to be explored. My Vesta is an Aquarius. In fact, there's in the background here, you can see my chart with the Vesta.
I can see your North Node with Vesta there. Yeah.
Yes. So this was a long journey to explore Vesta for me, but it's part of what showed up, and I felt that Aquarian energy strongly. And I'd love to share more about my journey there, because it's something that kind of broke me a little bit away from the Shamanic astrology paradigm a bit, because they were more about the house positions, the nodes. And it does play a big role, but I feel also that the sign plays a big role too. And I've looked at other astrology books and I've talked to other people, and it makes sense to me. Of course, even clients' charts too. But when you have your first Saturn return and your second Saturn return, there's a Vesta return, especially in the first Saturn return, Vesta return there's a lot of overlap there. And the 29th birthday can be really powerful in that way. And so for me, it was a spiritual awakening during that time. I had no idea that was coming for me, early on in my life. But when that came in, man, it was like a new being checked into myself. Like I awakened to something that I had no idea was within me, and just really beautiful. My perspective of the world changed, and the way I viewed Mother Earth and everything around us. Wow, it was one of the greatest gifts I ever received.
Beautiful.
So there we go.
Wonderful.
And I'm a certified shamanic astrologer, at least for the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School. And there's my contact info. You can find me in spiralnexus.com and with Caitlin Castell at mystaralchemy.com. And I do readings, I teach classes, I have a YouTube channel, social media presence, all of the usual suspects. And I do this. This is how I make a living. So it's my passion. I drive. I'm here to explore what makes us human and our relationship with the cosmos. Not scientifically necessarily, but who we are as humans and our symbolic, our philosophical, mythological, and relationship, our roles here on this planet. And to I love the world. I love people around me, and I just I hope I can keep spreading that love and that nourishment and help people thrive in their lives. It heartens me a lot when I see people come into themselves and become more of who they are. It's really, again, heartwarming to see that. So uh, it moves me a lot. Obviously, I got a lot of that Pisces coming through, Moon and Mars and Pisces. So yeah, it's in the beginning I thought it was a curse for me, but it's become more and more of a blessing and a divine gift, and I really appreciate that. More stories to share. This is to be continued.
Yep.
The end is always the beginning.
Yep. There you go. Pisces.
Yeah, exactly.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Eric. Yeah, and definitely, as we said, so many other things that we could just keep going. So
We could. And
we
Martha, thank you for doing the symposium. It's been a gift, a
probably,
blessing for all of us, and for me too. Thank you.
yeah.
All right.